Hello? Hello?
The Classic Guitar Rock Podcast starts right now.
Exclusively on ESPN Plus, UFC 313, Saturday. Reigning light heavyweight champion Alex Pereira defends his title against #1 contender Magomed Ankalaev, and an explosive lightweight bout between Justin Gaethje and Rafael Fiziev. UFC 313, Saturday at 10 p.m. Eastern. Buy it on ESPNplus.com/PPV.
Atomic batteries to power. Turbines to speed.
Ready to move out.
Before we start, I'd like to say something. There's no reason why you shouldn't have complete confidence in your chances to come out of this thing alive in one piece.
From coast to coast, from border to border, from one end to the other, and all points in between. The Classic Guitar Rock Podcast is on.
Yes! That's awesome!
We crank up and break down the great guitar-driven rock of the 70s and 80s, and you are invited to come along.
We got a full tank of gas, half a pack of cigarettes. It's dark, and we're wearing sunglasses. Hit it.
And now your hosts, Jeremy and Jeff.
1/2 teaspoon for fast, effective relief.
It's time for the Classic Guitar Rock Podcast. Welcome back. It's what episode is this? 8? Episode 8, Jeff.
Hey.
It's crazy. Of the Classic Guitar Rock Podcast. I'm Jeremy here with Jeff.
Howdy.
Jeff, how are you?
I'm doing well. I'm waiting for some more snow, and I got a new amp.
Another new amp.
I sold one, so I
All right. So
I kind of do this turnover thing.
I do the exact same thing. It's ridiculous.
I got a Vox. It's an
one?
AC30, but it only has one speaker.
Right. I've seen that one.
I don't know if it's a newer one or I just new to me.
Yeah.
But,
that's cool. Awesome.
Sweetwater had a special on it, so I jumped on it.
Good for you. Well, that's awesome. You'll have to let me know how you like that. I sold an amp this week. I had a big PV Ultra 410. So those are from the 90s. All tube, 410s, ridiculous. Great, awesome amp, but way more than I ever need. So I finally sold it last week. And actually, you'll be proud to know that I used the money that I made and actually put it on a credit card.
Hey.
I didn't go buy another amp, which is my temptation. I didn't. So I'm trying to exercise a little more control. So
Very grown up of you.
I know, it's scary. So we were supposed to have my friend Greg Feller joining us today. Greg is an engineer, a sound engineer in LA, works for a studio there. And we were scheduled. He said, I'm looking forward to it. I even sent him some questions in advance, and he was really stoked. He'd gone back and listened to all of our podcast episodes just so he was kind of up to speed. And he said, the only thing that would keep me from being able to make it is if someone books some time and they need me to come in. And that's exactly what happened. So he, at the moment we're recording this, is actually recording someone. And we'll get the dirt on some of this when we talk to him. So hopefully next week we'll have that. But Jeff, you had a great idea for this week. We've talked about it for a couple weeks, and it just kind of played out this week. So kind of explain to us what your idea was for this episode.
I think it stemmed from us talking about, we're sort of stuck in the 70s, or
I am,
give or take.
Sure. Yes. Yeah.
Me too. Maybe not as much as you.
Yeah.
At least from classic rock kind of, when we're listening to music, that kind of style, those kinds of guitars, that kind of sound, does it exist much in the 90s and the 2000s and now the 2020s? So you mentioned, hey, you might know some more modern kind of bands. And I said, yeah, some. Let's have a thing where I give you some of my bands that I've discovered, and you give me some that you've discovered, and we'll do a little bit of research, a little bit of listening, and then we'll discuss.
I like it, and I like how you made it sound a lot nicer than the way I would have said it. I basically said, I'm a curmudgeon-y old fart and I don't like anything new. So you convince me there's good music out there that a classic rock fogey like me would like. So that was kind of the task. And Jeff did it. He shared a couple bands with me, and I shared some with him also, but he shared a couple with me. And, you know, I have to say, and we'll get into this in a minute, but you only shared 4. You got a long list, but you gave me 4 just to check out.
Yeah.
I liked them all. There's a couple of them that I really liked. And so we'll talk about that. And before we get into it, I want to just in general talk about what is it. This is our very first episode. Remember when we kind of defined classic rock, and I think this is maybe worth talking about, is if you think of a guy like me, I think you're 50, I'm 53, guys in our age group, you know, we've got our music that we like from the 70s and 80s. So knowing that, I mean, what's the criteria? What modern stuff would a guy like me be looking for in his music? And you mentioned one, you said guitars, you know, we like the guitars, but what else is it about this newer stuff, Jeff, that's appealing to you as a fan of classic rock? When a newer band grabs you, what is it that you usually go, oh, I like this? What is it?
Probably not as produced and big, a little more raw.
Okay.
The vocals probably have a big important piece. You know, if it's like whatever, I don't know how to explain, something in the 80s where it was like that glam metal kind of.
Exactly.
That kind of voice, you know, I wouldn't put that in the classic rock category.
Right.
That might be a hard rock hairband kind of thing, that style. So if I hear that, I'm like, it doesn't really fall into classic rock. The production probably is a big piece too. Of course, technology changes, gear changes. We move forward and things just sound bigger maybe. And maybe the producers, engineers are just, hey, we should try this. We should try that. Let's have 8 layers of this.
Yeah.
But, you know, if you go back, you know, you can't beat a 4-piece Led Zeppelin kind of band that's just raw and straight ahead.
Yeah.
And can translate to the live stage. That might be another interesting dynamic here. Yeah.
That's a good one. You know, as I've thought about it, really what is one of the factors that really either attracts me or repels me from new music. And it's weird when I break it down, it's drums. I like the sound of drum, you know, real drums, but I like space. You know, I hate, this is going to alienate people when I say this. I hate that machine like double bass drum where it's just where there's no, that drives me crazy. And I can handle that on a song or a part of a song. But when you pop in this new music and all you hear is that nonstop bombast of drums with no let up, I just, that is a turnoff for me. Yeah. So drums are a big deal to me. I like the guitar sounds, obviously. Like you, the vocals are important to me. I like harmonies. You know, like I said, I'm a sucker for a poppy sounding songs if they've got crunchy guitars. I loved bands like Def Leppard. I love that stuff. And, you know, some people, that's a girls band, whatever, but I dug a lot of that stuff. Even you look at a Van Halen, you know, their guitars were heavy, but they always had good vocals. So for me, vocals are a big deal.
Yeah.
Harmonies and that sort of thing.
Would you say Van Halen is classic rock?
I would. I think I have a broader definition. For me, classic rock is basically any hard rock from the 70s and 80s. I kind of call classic rock. I mean, I know that's a broader definition than some people do. I don't consider, again, this is something that people might want to fight me in the parking lot about. Like grunge to me is not classic rock. That doesn't mean it's bad. I just don't really consider that classic rock. So interesting you bring this up. So I got onto, I don't want to say an argument. We were both civil about it, but a little discussion on Facebook with the guy, just got a little back and forth about the band Machine Head. Okay. So there was this article from Classic Rock magazine about the keyboard player in Machine Head making some political statement or whatever. And I just made a little remark about, is this a classic rock band? You know, and then this guy comes back, he says, you consider yourself a classic rock fan and you don't even know who Machine Head is? And I've heard of the band. I said, I consider the Deep Purple album Machine Head classic rock, but I don't consider these guys classic rock. Well, they've been around for 25 years. And so I said, you know what? I'll go check them out. And I went and checked them out. And guess what? They were.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, no, that's not classic rock to me. And I know a lot of us old guys have made the transition and get into some of this heavier new stuff. And I guess I'm just a fuddy-duddy. I'm not into stuff that is that heavy, you know.
I mean, there's a lot of labels. If someone wanted to label something, right? Sure. To me, you could just say it's heavy metal, it's or
heavy
some
metal.
Kind of
it's speed metal,
hard rock,
power metal. It's thrash metal. Yeah. I don't know what the difference is, but for me, it's if it's guitar driven music from the 60s, 70s, 80s. To me, I just call it classic rock. You know, so that's a pretty broad definition. But I know I have lamented over the past that because the music industry has changed so much, right? It's hard to find classic rock because, you know, when we were kids, right, the stuff that we liked, we heard at least a lot of it on the radio. Mm-hmm. You'd hear Van Halen on the radio. You'd hear Aerosmith on the radio. You'd hear Motley Crue on the radio, you know, all of that. Hair metal. See, I throw hair metal into classic rock, most of it, you know, but you'd hear that on the radio. Now you got to go looking for it. You have to go searching to find a lot of this stuff because there just aren't the platforms like there used to be for some of these.
I think we mentioned, you know, MTV was huge for me. So I got exposed to a lot of bands that way.
And there was
especially before I got my driver's license.
For sure, you didn't have anything else to do, right?
You weren't driving around and listening to the radio. Then you were.
Yeah, and remember at the beginning, we may have talked about this already, but remember the first couple years, MTV's playlist was completely different than radio's playlist. Do you remember?
Sure.
I mean, and then by about 4 or 5 years, after 4 or 5 years, it was pretty much identical. It had been homogenized, but the first few years. I mean, you could see a video from Split Enz and then they'd go into a Judas Priest video, right? And it's like, that was pretty cool, actually. Yeah. For those of us that in our generation, it's not as easy in my mind to find that kind of melodic rock stuff that we would like to hear. You have to look a lot further for it. You have to look a lot harder for it. So
I think, not to keep going with this, what is classic rock, but much like many shifts in music styles in the mainstream or popular kind of consciousness, I feel like there was the 60s period, and then it kind of mid 60s into 70s, there was this like reaction, perhaps much like grunge might have been a reaction to the hair metal.
For sure.
They were like, F you, what is this makeup and outfits and hair? Like, we're going to come out and just roar.
Exactly.
You know, so I feel like it's also a period thing that for me, I relate the term classic rock with.
Yeah. And I think you're right. I think your definition is probably a little more accurate than mine. Mine's probably a little broader, but that point you make is very valid because there's a few different times when that's happened, right? Grunge was a reaction to the hair metal and the stuff. Punk was a reaction to, at the time in the 70s, these bloated, which I love, by the way, these bloated, overproduced albums. I love that crap, right? But punk was a definite middle finger to what the music industry was at the time. Mm-hmm. You know, and then the hard rock bands of the later 70s, right? They were like disco, you know, let's play some rock, you know. So yeah. I agree that there were a number of those turning of the tide, changing of the tide throughout the 60s, 70s, and even the 80s. So when we come back, Jeff, let's jump in and we'll start sharing our lists with each other. And I also want to talk about a specific record label too, that is kind of playing in this niche of what they call new classic rock. So all that and more when we come back on the Classic Guitar Rock Podcast.
Here at the Almond Joy Factory, where tropical vibes abound, we use soft, fresh-tasting coconut.
The crunchiest almonds and delicious chocolate candy.
Ah, but do you know what our most important ingredient is? Sometimes you feel like a nut.
Sometimes you don't.
Almond Joy's got nuts and something even way better than that. Yes, Almond Joy is made with almonds and joy.
All right, welcome back to the Classic Guitar Rock Podcast. And, we could have called this episode No Country for Old Men. That could have been the name of this episode, Jeff. So we're going to talk about, if you're like us, right? You yearn for that great classic rock music of yesteryear, that you'll love this conversation we're going to have, because we're going to talk about new music that's coming out that a classic rock fan would dig. But before we do that, and I meant to tell you, but I forgot, we've got a new little feature here. Jeff is going to share. We got to come up with a name for this. What do we call it? This is classic rock headlines. We call it news. We call it Jeff's junk. I don't know. I don't know what we call it.
What do they call on SNL? Just the news?
It's the
weekend
update. Okay.
Yes.
So
something like that.
It's the classic rock weekend update.
CRG update.
It is the weekend CRG update. I like it. So, all right. So
we need a little helicopter or something.
Ripped from the headlines. Jeff has the news.
The first thing that I need to mention is it's not actually classic rock per se specific, but it's funny.
Okay.
And we both play guitar.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you saw this headline about a lot of folks are saying, conspiracy theorists, that the vaccine for COVID
right
secretly has a 5G chip.
Ooh.
Somehow nanoparticles, implanted in it.
Okay.
So we're getting these vaccines, and then we have this chip inside, and we're going to be tracked and traced and all that. Right? So the people who are pushing this story posted this diagram.
Okay.
Of the supposed 5G chip that's in these vaccines. Well, the diagram, the schematic, is a schematic from the Boss Heavy Metal Zone pedal. With op amps and whatever else, capacitors. And it's just so ridiculous that and this story just propagates.
And whoever started it probably said, well, that looks like a scary schematic. Probably had no idea what it was or where it came from. That's hilarious.
Is that hilarious? So that's number one. Number two, we're both fans of Kiss, and apparently they have this last farewell road tour.
Yeah.
Or End of the Road.
Yep.
I don't know if you heard that.
Yeah.
I watched a little bit of a show they did not too long ago, and their pyrotechnics, it's just out of control.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just massive. And they're still running around with all the gear.
Yeah.
And the boots. And Paul Stanley is like 68 years old or something.
Oh, yeah.
And Gene Simmons is 71. And they just can't do it anymore.
Right.
I mean,
and did you see the New Year's show from Dubai? Did you see some of that footage?
I think that's what it was. Wow. Yeah. Unbelievable. So there's crowds, right? COVID doesn't.
So I don't know how I didn't watch enough to see where the crowds were, but I envisioned in Dubai, and I could be completely wrong, but the way they were set up, their stage was set up, they're out in this big, I don't know what you call it. It's like in front of a courtyard of a palace. And I, in my mind, envision that it's a bunch of millionaires and billionaires kind of surrounding them in their own little luxury boxes watching the show. I don't know. Do you actually see a crowd? Do you see people jumping up and down in the crowd?
I didn't even I didn't look too carefully.
Yeah, I think it's one of these. It's like all of these, and of course, if you wanted to watch it live, I mean, it was like $100 to watch it for the cheap paper, and then it went up from there. But here's the thing, Jeff. I see both sides of it, right? Here's these old geezers that should have given it up a long time ago, right? But on the other hand, people are still buying tickets. People are still willing to pay. And it's a great show. I mean, other than, the lip syncing and all the other stuff that's going on, but the pyrotechnics is great. I mean, it's probably a lot of fun to go to a Kiss show. And why not? Why not? If they can still make the money, why not?
Hey, if people are having fun and enjoying.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of bands that are continuing to carry the flame.
And they probably shouldn't. But as long as people are willing to pay, who are we to say, oh, you guys need to hang it up? We might think they need to, but someone's willing to pay.
What else are they going to do?
Exactly. One of the things, and Eddie Trunk is really big on this, and I kind of disagree, is he's like, these bands that go out and tour. So let me think of a good example. Are you familiar with Black Star Riders? So Thin Lizzy, Scott Gorham, one of the latest incarnations of Thin Lizzy was only Scott Gorham, right? And then he had these other guys, and they were calling themselves Thin Lizzy, and they were great. They sounded awesome. They got a Phil Lynott sound-alike guy to sing, and they sound really good. But they got a lot of heat, Then calling yourselves Thin Lizzy, you're the only guy. So they changed their name to Black Star Riders, and they put out a couple albums. Still sounds just like Thin Lizzy, right? But they're not calling themselves Thin Lizzy anymore. Eddie Trunk's deal is, if you're out touring and you're saying you're so-and-so, and you've only got one original person, that's a ripoff. And my counter to that is, and he even says this, he says, but what I'm finding out is most people don't care. They don't care. They buy their ticket. They go see the band. They don't care if there's 3 different versions of Bachman Turner Overdrive, touring the country, playing county fairs. They don't care, and so his deal was that, and the whole lip syncing. If you're seeing a show where they're lip syncing or playing to tracks, they need to disclose that on the tickets or whatever. And again, he said, I'm finding most people don't care. They don't care that Paul Stanley is lip syncing. They don't care that, there's backtracks playing, that they aren't actually even playing live, a lot of this stuff. And a lot of bands do that these days.
Is Paul Stanley lip syncing?
In fact, you can go on YouTube and find lots of videos from this latest tour where he's clearly lip syncing because he's 6 feet away from the mic. And
that's a giveaway.
That's a giveaway.
I feel like, what? I'm gonna just be judgmental and say, like, that's not rock and roll.
Yeah, I agree.
Then I'd hang it up. If you can't do it, then just say we had a great run. Let's call it.
There again, people are willing to pay to watch him lip sync and play to backing tracks. So, anyway,
yeah,
that's a whole nother show. So, thank you. Any other news headlines there?
Yeah, a band that I just didn't get into that much back from way back. Vanilla Fudge, the bass player Tim Bogert.
Yep,
he passed away.
I saw that. Cancer, I think.
Yeah,
the thing. It's weird how things timing wise are so weird. I a week ago was at a thrift store with my son, and I bought the Beck Bogart Appice album, the first album they made, for $1.
Wow.
And it's pretty good, actually. It's that jammy, think of the time it's from like 71 or something. So you think of what albums were like in 71, but yeah, Jeff Bogart's one of those guys. It's very well respected by, bass players. He played in a band called Cactus. I'm not as familiar with Cactus, but the Beck Bogart Appice, they did a couple things. That obviously the guy is a monster player. I think he sang some of the songs too. He and Carmine both did. But
I thought about this is the time when some of these guys are sadly passing, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's from illness or just getting to be old age.
Getting old. Yeah.
And another 10 years or less, we're going to lose Clapton and Peter Frampton.
It's going to be
maybe a little longer. We'll see. But you know what I mean?
You're absolutely right.
And so then what? We're going to have to come up with our own band before,
Exactly. Well, that's why this episode is so important, right? That's why this episode is so important.
Okay.
Any other news headlines?
Last one I was pretty surprised about, but not surprised. Mick Fleetwood and Lindsey Buckingham selling out their rights.
I saw the one about Lindsey Buckingham. I didn't see that about Mick Fleetwood.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yep. I think one of them just sold like publishing versus the other performance or something.
Right.
But still, and then Stevie Nicks also, she sold 80% of her publishing rights last year. And it's like, they're not making money on album sales.
Not like they were.
Certainly not streaming.
Right, exactly.
So it's probably a smart move, I guess, from a business point of view.
And I think probably, I don't know, I'm not inside their heads, but, again, to your earlier point, they're getting older. And they probably say, okay, I can cash out now. I'm going to get whatever amount of millions of dollars or whatever I'm getting. And I've got 10 years left, 15 years left, whatever. And, maybe that's why they figure I'll take the cash now. So I don't know. It's interesting. It's interesting. Remember,
as long as the songs aren't in a Hallmark greeting card.
Well, and that's the thing, right? That's the thing. So if you remember way back in the 80s, Michael Jackson bought the Beatles publishing rights. And it was not long until you started to see car commercials with, you say you want a revolution, and a lot of people were like, yeah. So that's a whole weird thing. And we could do a whole show just on that. Think of all the old blues musicians that died penniless, for instance, because they were swindled out of their publishing.
Yeah.
And then you got like a Led Zeppelin who literally just stole songs from these blues artists, just stole them and would say they wrote them. And over the years, they've kind of had to make amends on a lot of those things, but they would take a Willie Dixon song and rock it out and say they wrote it. And how many millions of dollars were those old blues guys cheated out of because their songs were just stolen?
The bloody British.
It's the bloody British. Yeah. So anyway,
it's true.
It is true. And it's sad. And so publishing is a big deal. So you gotta hang on to that. So,
all right, that's it.
Before we talk about some specific bands, I want to talk about Frontier Records. I don't know if we've mentioned them. Have we mentioned Frontier Records?
I don't believe so. Not with me.
Frontier Records is this company in Spain. I think it's in Spain. And it's been around, I don't know, 5-6 years. And here's the thing. I go on Spotify, there's a Frontier Records playlist. But what Frontier Records has done over the last 5 or 10 years is they focus on classic rock, what they call melodic rock. And so they'll do one of two things. They'll bring classic artists in who don't get any attention from record companies, and they'll sign those guys. For instance, Asia made some albums on Frontier. I think the latest Blue Oyster Cult album is on Frontiers. So they take these classic artists, they bring them in, they produce records for them. Then the other thing they do is it's kind of like a McDonald's of classic rock. It is rock for the masses. And I don't mean that to sound as negative as it sounds, because some of it I really like. But what this guy does is he puts together these groups. He'll just assemble groups. Hey, let's take this guy from here. Revolution Saints is one of these, right? He takes Doug Aldrich, who's kind of a utility guitar player who's played for everyone.
Yeah.
Doug Aldrich. Let's take Jack Blades from Night Ranger. Let's take Dean Castronovo, who's a drummer who was in Journey, played with Ozzy. He's a singer. So he builds these bands, and has them record albums that basically I think they just get streamed because that's where it ends. There's no promotion. There's no tours. So I kind of wonder what the appeal is to these artists because they can't be making that much money, right? But there's just a constant churn of new music coming out aimed at the classic rock, melodic rock fan base, right? So from that standpoint, it's kind of cool. You should check out Frontier. In fact, I think two of the bands I shared with you are Frontier bands, right? But I
didn't know that.
I really like them, but it's weird because the model, and this is a product of the music business today, right? It's just so different. It's changed so much. The internet has changed everything. Streaming has changed everything. But Frontier Records is one of these labels that just kind of builds these bands and they crank out records. And I guess you can buy the records. So some people buy the records. You know, I think most people probably just stream them. But it's interesting. And
so are they actually just distributing or when you say get these bands together, are they calling people up and saying, hey, talk to this person? I think
that's what I think they do. I mean, I think that he'll reach out to someone and say, hey, we'd love you guys. What would you guys think of getting together and making an album? Right. And even I've noticed there are like YouTube stars, people you see on YouTube that have started their YouTube channels and just sing. All of a sudden, Frontiers calls them up and said, hey, we want you to make a record. And so they'll make a record. Like there's a guy, I think he's in Mexico, who's a great metal singer. And you can go watch his videos of him singing Iron Maiden songs and Dio songs. And he's good, right? And so I just saw that he's inked a deal with Frontier Records to put out an album. So it's just kind of mass producing these albums. And some of them are really good.
Interesting.
And it has exposed me to some bands that some of them have been around a long time and were popular in Europe, but I never had heard of them. But then as I've heard them, I'm like, these guys are pretty good. So that's just an interesting thing. I wanted to throw that out there. And I'm sure there's other labels doing the same thing, but check out Frontier Records. You can go on Spotify, find their playlist, or go to their website. So they'll release stuff from classic artists, right? Where other record companies won't, but then they also put together these new groups.
It's kind of wild because just by doing a little listening to the 3 bands or 4 that you sent me, it seems like those are all session guys that play live.
Yeah.
So Frontier may be thinking, oh, these guys all know each other, so we're just asking them if they want to jam and make a couple albums.
And you see someone like, well, I mentioned Doug Aldrich and Dean Castronova, 2 guys right there. They're probably both in 4 different bands right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and they might all be Frontier Records bands. I don't know. And I think maybe once a year or something, they'll do a big show where they'll bring these bands together and they'll actually maybe play live for one show, but there's no tours. There's no real support, no real advertising. So they've been doing it for a while. So apparently they're making enough money to keep doing it.
However, we don't know. Yeah.
It's an interesting thing. So anyways, why don't you give me the 4 bands you asked me to listen to, and then I'll talk about them. And then I'll give you the 4 bands I told you to listen to, and you can talk about them. How's that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
All right.
Let's see.
And the premise is, let me roll this premise one more time. The premise is we're supposed to share bands that an old crusty classic rock fan would like. New music. Okay. This is new music that even old geezers like us would like. Okay. How's that?
Or newer, I guess.
Newer. Yeah. Newer. Yes. Okay.
So yeah, specifically, I didn't give you Black Crowes because I think they're just kind of, but they are one of the,
I like them. I like Black Crowes.
Early 90s, 91, maybe. Shake Your Money Maker or whatever came out. I feel like they're carrying, they're one of the bands that were carrying the torch. Like to me, that's just good old classic rock, you know? So I gave you Wolf Mother. Okay. Because I just think they rock and they're kind of carrying that Led Zeppelin, Deep Purple torch or something.
Yeah.
Blackberry Smoke. Marcus King Band, who's just an amazing guitar player, singer, songwriter, vocalist, amazing voice. Gary Clark Jr.
Yeah.
Kind of in the bluesy, kind of hard rock bluesy stuff. But
yours was really on the bluesy side, which I like. I got to tell you though, I really liked all of them. The one I listened to the most was actually Wolf Mother. I loved it. It's a throwback. There's a lo-fi thing going on in terms of, like you said, you don't want super slick production. You know, I noticed like at the end of a lot of the songs, it's noisy and you hear, you know, so it's kind of like this intentional lo-fi, but they have a very much fuzz tone versus distortion on a lot of the stuff. And even some of the old keyboardy sounds. I liked it. I liked the way the guy sings. I didn't know a thing about him. And
from Australia, right?
From Australia, and apparently kind of a revolving door of musicians other than that. Is it Stockdale, the lead singer's name? Can't remember.
Yeah, I didn't know that until I read a couple little tidbits. And their first album came out a while ago, right?
Yeah, it's I can't remember.
2006, maybe?
Yeah, like 2005, 2006, something like that. And now the thing is, I heard definitely some Zeppelin influence in there. I kind of heard, this is kind of the same territory. I kind of heard some Sabbath-y stuff, you know, in terms of the riffage and stuff, but I liked them because I listened to them in this way. It doesn't give me a whole lot of context. So what I did, I just went to Spotify, you know, when you find the artist and just hit the play button. So I was hearing stuff from all of their albums. I don't know the order I was listening to. I don't know all the songs, but I probably listened to them for 90 minutes last night. And I liked it. I mean, that's a band I want to dig into a little more.
Start with that first album. It's self-titled, I believe.
Okay. Yeah, I'll do that. That's definitely one I want to dig into more. So thank you for that recommendation.
Sure.
And then you also gave me
Blackberry Smoke.
Blackberry Smoke. You're more of I'm more of a British snob. I think you are into more American bands than I am. And that's not intentional on my part. I just noticed that a lot of the bands you mentioned, you really like Joe Walsh, you really like Aerosmith, you really like Molly Hatchet, and I like Molly Hatchet too, but I think I'm more into the British bands, which is just interesting. But Blackberry Smoke, I like them too, and that's a very much a, you know, there's a real Southern rock tradition in classic rock. I mean, you look back, and I'm not talking. I mean, like Blackfoot. Blackfoot was Southern rock, but they were rocking. I mean, they just
great.
They were, and that's kind of, these guys sound a little more country to me than a Blackfoot. You definitely hear the country and it's interesting looking at they've opened for country band, Zach Brown band, you know, so they've opened for country bands. They've opened for ZZ Top and Leonard Skinner. So they kind of got this, they're from Atlanta, right? So they get the Southern rock, the country crowd, but they rock. I mean, the guitar playing was really good. I really liked them too. It's good stuff.
Yeah, I don't know tons about them, you know, but what I've heard, I'm like, yeah, for sure.
They're good.
Keep doing what you're doing.
And then Marcus King. I had seen some Marcus King videos before, and it's really good too. You know, yours is more Southern tinged and blues tinged than my list was for sure. But they were all great, and I can see myself listening to all of these bands more. Gary Clark Jr. was the other one you gave me. Gary Clark, I saw on a Howard Stern episode, and they were playing a Beatles tune. Was that Come Together?
Oh yeah, I saw that.
Okay, I think that might be the one.
I think Come Together was the tune, and I want to say it was for like the Iron Man soundtrack.
Something, but it was
does that sound familiar?
It was really good. He was playing an SG, I remember. It was really good.
Yeah, his live stuff is, I think, far superior.
And what he does is he morphs. He's not just blues. Like if you see, is it Eric Gales, another blues player? He's more, he's really good too. Very bluesy, as is Gary Clark, but Gary Clark he adds in some other elements too, more so. Now, here's the thing, and I don't want to go all, cultural, philosophical on us, but for many years, the blues went through this transition, right? It was the African-American blues artists that where blues came from, right? And then England, they took that, the early, Clapton, the Rolling Stones, they were doing these, they loved the blues stuff more than we did here in the US. Mm-hmm. So that's where the blues kind of got this rebirth. And in fact, a lot of these guys like Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf, they had second careers going to England. And in the 60s, they're playing to all these British kids, these blues songs they've been playing since the 40s and 50s. And all of a sudden, people loved it, right? Well, and then the electric blues bands and the rock bands of Britain, they kind of Led Zeppelin, all of these bands start stealing from these blues guys. But the weirdest thing is you didn't see any of the new blues guys like through the 70s and 80s were all white guys. They were all white guys. It was white guys that continued to buy blues albums, that continued to fly the blues flag. We had Stevie Ray Vaughan, we had all of these guys, and there were still, Buddy Guy's still around, but through the 80s, Buddy Guy was still playing, and a lot of these, but just like you said earlier, they're all starting to die. And so it was like, are there gonna be any young black kids that are playing the blues? And there are, fortunately. Have you seen Kingfisher? You seen that guy?
Yes, I have seen that, dude.
Golly.
I saw him on Michael Palmisano. I think I mentioned him before. He does like a reaction / guitar lesson type of channel. And he profiled the Kingfish.
And so when Kingfish was on,
and he was just,
the
awesome.
guy is, if any of you that aren't familiar with, and he broke when he was like 15, right? And he's probably 20 now or early 20s, but real big kid, but just plays like crazy. And so I'm happy when I see that, because I see some black kids that are playing blues, and I think that's awesome, because throughout the 80s you never saw that, right? The only guys that were into blues were old white dudes, right? Yeah. So it's cool to see that that's not the case anymore. But
that's interesting, because part of my list, not to derail you too much, but was there was a pattern of like these hard rock guitar blues guys, like Johnny Lang, Eric Gales, Kenny Wayne Shepherd, Joe Bonamassa.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And all of them, pretty much all the names I just mentioned, they started when they were kids, like 11, 12, 13, 14. They were already in bands, winning contests. And I just find that kind of really, it's an interesting connection.
There's a video, and I'm sure it makes him cringe, but there's a video of Bonamassa when he's like 11 or 12 playing with Robin Ford and maybe Stevie Ray Vaughan. I can't remember. Whoa. Joe Bonamassa's like 12. Maybe it's just with Robin Ford, but he's 11 and he doesn't have the stage etiquette down. He can obviously play really good for an 11-year-old, but like he won't quit playing. It's like he just won't play. And he's up there with Robin Ford, he's one of my favorites. Robin Ford's one of my all-time favorites. But here's, this 12-year-old that won't shut up and let Robin Ford play. And Robin's just kind of back there doing his thing, But it's amazing to see a 12-year-old kid. And of course, he's dressed like Stevie Ray Vaughan. That's what it is. It's Bonamassa and Robin Ford, and Bonamassa's dressed like Stevie Ray Vaughan. It just looks really funny. This blonde-haired little kid. In my quest of searching for some bands, this thread of these young kids now are in their 20s, getting into their maybe 30s, hard rock blues players versus the Blackberry Smoke kind of like Southern rock, classic rock bands. We see a lot of these young kids doing the blues rock thing. Yeah, and there's several white kids and black kids, which is awesome. So those are the 4 bands you gave me. Now I feel kind of embarrassed about some of the bands I gave you. Well, you know what? The first thing I thought of
was that the first three you gave me
Who did I get?
Dead Daisies,
Dead Daisies. Okay.
Revolution Saints, Tokyo Motor Fist.
Yeah,
And then the last one was Flying Colors, which is a little separate thing.
yeah.
So I listened to them just quick. So really quickly, I thought, oh, not so much classic rock, but but you said it earlier. You love Def Leppard.
Yeah, totally.
And I know that about you, and I actually do too. Although I've left that a little bit to the side, and I have more of that, the classic rock type in my foreground. But those three bands are very much relics or leftover from the 80s melodic rock.
Very 80s. Yep. Those three are very 80s. Yeah.
Very 80s. And I've got some good notes here. Let me see. Yeah, and I really thought they were from the 80s.
Right. No, they did totally. Yeah.
So, but like Revolution Saints, they started 2015. But you listen to it and you're like, what? They're bringing it back.
Yeah, exactly.
Or that's just what they love, that kind of riff-based, hard riff, 80s, big produced.
There's a
big
ton
drums,
of
layered vocals.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Like Def Leppard, they had that, how many vocal tracks could we have?
Exactly. We can get another 40 on here.
15, 20.
Yeah.
So, but I haven't heard of any of these bands, so it was kind of cool. So Dead Daisies, New Zealand, or I guess.
Yeah, there's some Australians, and see, that's one of those bands that is revolving too. So Doug Aldrich, again, he's in two of the bands I gave you. He's in Dead Daisies and he's in Revolution Saints, and he's an American, but yeah, and then they just got Glenn Hughes in Dead.
Yes, he's like, that's the current lineup, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
A little GNR.
Yeah.
In there, a little Stone Temple Pilots, little Motley Crue.
Yeah.
David Coverdale kind of voice a little bit. I guess that would be was it David Lowie?
Oh, I think you're right. Yeah, he was before Glenn Hughes. Yeah.
I thought he was like, is that David Coverdale?
He had that sound for sure.
But yeah, a super group, right? Which is like I also thought your theme here was like
exactly
guys coming together.
Yep, totally.
Which also ties into Frontier, like you were talking about. So they were kind of fun. Revolution Saints, that's the one with Dean, right? Yeah, Castronova.
Who sings like
Perry. Steve Perry. I thought, is this a Journey song?
Yeah.
Is this the Journey band? Yep. Really wild. I thought, oh my God. And I love Jack Blades. I just I've seen YouTube videos with him with Tommy Shaw doing the acoustic thing.
They're great.
And they're cool. And Doug Aldrich, Whitesnake. But very, again, that 80s.
Very 80s. Yeah.
Very 80s.
So, and I won't apologize for that. Yeah.
No, do not. Please. Do not. Tokyo Motor Fist. I couldn't even find a wiki page on them.
I know, because
they've got a Facebook page.
They've got 2 albums. Yeah. And
2017 to now, right?
And so it's the lead singer he was in Danger. Can't even remember his name.
Ted Poley, yes.
Yep. And then Greg Smith, who played bass in Rainbow. He's played with Ted Nugent.
Alice Cooper.
The drummer was in Rainbow. Can't remember his name.
Chuck Berge.
Yeah, but then Steve Brown, who was in Trickster. Here's what's funny. Steve Brown was a guitar player in Trickster, and he writes it all and he produces it all. You can go find live footage of him playing in the last couple years with Def Leppard, because there was a time when Vivian Campbell was having his problems with lymphoma. He was diagnosed with lymphoma. He had to miss some dates, and so they called this Steve Brown guy in. Then when Phil Collins' wife was having a baby, they call him in to play Phil's parts. So he's like an interchangeable Def Leppard member if they ever need him. He knows all the songs. He sings all the parts. He plays all the parts. That's why that album sounds like a Def Leppard album.
Gotcha.
That's a lot.
Makes sense now. Hired Guns. Yeah?
Hired Guns. Totally.
Just like that documentary. It's
yeah.
Like we're in a different world now. One of the songs that I write it down reminded me of Y&T. Do you remember Y&T?
I do remember Y&T.
They were one of the MTV hair metal bands when I was in high school, and I just thought that's where they started. But apparently they formed in like early 70s. I thought, they've influenced a lot of bands because they were doing it before anybody else. Mm-hmm. And one of these tunes, I was like, oh, that sounds like Y&T.
Yeah, totally.
For sure.
Was it Summertime Girls that it sounded like? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and I can't remember what song it would have been, but yeah, both of those albums, they're total
Shameless.
Okay, yeah. They're
Shameless.
total 80s songs. I mean, it sounds like they came out in the 80s. And what's funny if you watch their videos, Jeff, is these guys are our age and they're trying to be all cool in their videos and doing all the poses and stuff. And it just makes it kind of funny to watch.
You just gotta think, they're having fun. They don't care.
Exactly.
Right at this point.
And they got to be laughing when they do it, but it's just kind of goofy. So
one cool thing that I discovered, Danger had Andy Timmons.
Yes.
As a guitar player.
Yes.
And I've been watching True Fire Lessons, that online guitar lesson website.
Right.
And I've been watching Andy Timmons' courses, but I had no idea that he was in this band.
Really good. And
he's super good.
So here's something funny. A lot of people don't know. So I gave you Flying Colors as a band too.
Yeah.
What'd you think of them, by the way?
I thought they were the most interesting out of the three. But then I realized Steve Morse is guitar player, right?
Steve Morse is in there.
Kind of prog rock.
Yeah. What's his name? The Dream Theater, Portnoy. Mike Portnoy is the drummer. And Portnoy, another guy, he's probably in 5 different bands right now. Okay. Because he's in Sons of Apollo, one of the bands that Greg recorded, by the way, that we'll have next week on. He recorded an album with Portnoy on it. So yeah, they're very progressive. It's the lead singer is Morse, right? Neil Morse, no relation to Steve Morse, but he fronts his own progressive rock band, and they're really good. I mean, they're progressive-y, very technical, but at the same time, they've got good vocals and stuff. So they're kind of like trying to do progressive rock with a more pop sensibility, but they're all monsters, and I really like them. I really like them. Yeah.
I don't know this band that I'm going to mention that well, except immediately one of the songs. I think it was the song More on sounded just like the band Muse.
Okay. I can hear that. Yeah. I've actually been in a band where we played a few Muse songs.
Yeah. Very
I could see that.
Theatrical,
exactly,
loud, just like emotional.
And that band, every player in that band,
Muse
can no, not Muse. I was talking about Flying Colors. Probably Muse is this way too, but Flying Colors they're all just top notch. I mean, they could play with anyone and play anything.
Yeah.
But one thing I wanted to mention, just because it's interesting, you mentioned Andy Timmons. A lot of folks don't remember this, but Poison replaced C.C. DeVille with a guy named Richie Kotzen. And I don't know if you ever watch Richie Kotzen. He's in Winery Dogs. He is, I mean, the idea of talk about slumming it when this is terrible, right? But I don't have Poison's not a great musical band, right? But Richie Kotzen is phenomenal. I mean, a brilliant player, a brilliant singer. I mean, he is top notch. And to think that he was in Poison for a while, that's what I think about the whole Andy Timmons thing. So I'm like, that's ridiculous, because Richie Kotzen he plays with Portnoy and Billy Sheehan in Winery Dogs, just a 3-piece. And they're just, that's one I should have put on the list. Winery Dogs. Unbelievable. Just all 3 of them are just virtuosos. And Richie Kotzen, of course, is doing these phenomenal things while he sings. I don't know how you do it. Plays with his fingers mostly too, but plays a Telecaster with his fingers, and they just play. They'll go back and do some cover of a 70s Earth, Wind and Fire song or something. It's like, it's just unbelievable.
Yeah. Steve Morse too, right?
Oh,
the Dregs, Dixie Dregs.
Yeah.
I just sort of discovered them recently.
And
I mean, just so cool.
You go really back and watch. I was just watching one from like Midnight Special from like the late 70s, the Dixie Dregs band.
Yeah. Really, really talented.
I think the drummer from Dixie Dregs, this is more classic rock family tree. I think the drummer from Dixie Dregs was in Winger.
No way.
I think he went on to play in Winger. I think that's correct. And he played for Alice Cooper too at some point. But the Dixie Dregs were one of these bands that were just monster talented guys. Ridiculous.
Ahead of their time.
Yeah, big time.
I think.
For sure.
Cool. That's fun. Do you have any honorary mentions?
I do. I have a few. I mentioned Frontier, and these aren't really necessarily new bands. They're new to me, that someone with, that likes classic rock would probably like. There's a lot of these European bands that I was never familiar with. One is called Pretty Maids. And it's ironic they're called Pretty Maids because now they're all a bunch of old ugly guys. But they've been around since the 80s, right? And in the 80s, they were around back in the 80s, and they look like your typical hair metal band. They're, I think, from Holland. So Pretty Maids, I like them. And there's another band they're British, called FM. They're a little poppier. They kind of at times kind of sound like Survivor or something to me, but I really like it. The instrumentation's all really good. The guitar playing's really tasty. FM's one. Most of these are Frontier bands. There's a band called Wet. They might pronounce it W-E-T. There might be, I can't remember. But again, and most of these are European bands. So those are a few that I added on my list. Oh, and another thing. This is a really good album. Adrian Vandenberg put out an album in 2020, I think in July or August. He's got this guy named Ronnie Romero, who's from Spain. He's one of these Frontier guys. He fronted when Rainbow did their little reunion about 3 years ago. Ronnie Romero's the guy they got to sing. He can do Dio. He's got a great voice, but he's on the new Vandenberg album. I was just listening to that last night. I think Rudy Sarzo might play on that too. I can't remember. But anyways, that's great. That's a great album. Okay. Vandenberg was in Whitesnake. He had the Vandenberg album in the early 80s. And it's not shreddy. It's more of a classic rocky. It's not the 80s shred like you might expect from Adrian Vandenberg. It's got some of that, but it's a more just a rock album, Yeah. It's really good. So that's kind of what was on your list. I know you have a long list.
Widespread Panic.
Really?
Yeah, a lot of people think they fall into this, I don't know, jam band category.
Yeah,
and they do. They jam. They can go on 5-7 minute kind of jams.
Right.
But they're not Grateful Dead, String Cheese, Fishy. They're they're hard. They're rock.
Right.
They're definitely hard rock. The riffs, just the vibe. And so when they're jamming, you're just kind of it's kind of I don't know, like Skynyrd.
Well, I'm gonna check.
Freebird jams out for how many minutes at the end, and you wouldn't say, "Oh, it's too jammy," right? That's just like awesome riffs and high energy. They're just a great band. They've been around a long time.
Yeah, and that's a band I've always heard of. I couldn't tell you a song of theirs, but I kind of had them pigeonholed in that Fish, String Cheese category.
Yeah, no.
I'll check them out.
Yeah, I'll. Let's see. What's a live album would be also, again, they're one of those bands, live album. Light Fuse, Getaway. Black Keys. I wouldn't say classic rock, but
you know
Black
what?
Keys.
I like them. Everything of theirs I've heard, I've really dug.
Great. Plus Dan, what's his name? Dan, I'm going to butcher his last name. Auerbach.
Yeah.
Produced the last Marcus King album.
Really? Interesting. Okay.
But yeah, those guys are great. Talk about fuzz.
Oh yeah, they like their fuzz tones. Yeah, for sure.
North Mississippi All-Stars.
Okay, now I have heard of them. Never heard them, but heard of them. Okay.
Brothers, Luther and Luther Dickinson and his brother Cody. Excuse me. Cody on drums, Luther playing guitar. Luther actually joined the Black Crowes for a little while.
Whoa.
Playing guitar. They come from a family of their father was big into the music, big musician guy, and just talented again. Like 3 bass, guitar, drums.
That's all you need.
Bluesy, rock and roll, but they're still around, still doing their thing. I saw them in the parking lot at Steamboat Springs, Steamboat Ski Resort. Yeah, like 10 years ago. All right, Government Mule.
Okay.
Warren Haynes.
Yeah, they're great.
Pretty awesome. Like there's some good stuff there.
Yeah.
You're Glenn Hughes again. Black Country Communion.
Love Black.
Have you heard of this super group?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I have.
I didn't really know that existed.
I think they have 3 albums now. I've got the first 2. Yeah, really good. That's Bonamassa and Jason Bonham on drums, right? Isn't that the drums? And then Derek, what's his name? The keyboard player. Yeah, they're just phenomenal. I love them. Yeah. Man in the Middle. Great song. That's on their second album. But yeah, I'm a big Glenn Hughes fan.
What do you think of Greta Van Fleet?
You know, it's funny because I was going to ask.
Very controversial.
You know what? I like them. I do. I like their first album, and yeah, I get it. And I think the only problem is, maybe it's not a problem, is for the younger generation that thinks this is original, you know, as long as people know that it's not. Robert Plant doesn't have a problem with them, you know? So I'm like, and this has happened before. Remember Kingdom Come back in the 80s, same thing. These Zeppelin ripoffs. Yeah. You hear Zeppelin in the vocals, but I like it. I mean, it's like, hey, I would much rather a young band is putting out good rock music than some electronic bull crap, you know?
Yeah. And you have to imagine if they're talented kids, or they're good songwriters, that they're gonna morph, they're gonna change.
Absolutely.
They're gonna find their own sound.
I like them. I enjoy listening to them.
And you know, Petty came out in the 70s, but he continued to record. So I had him I had the Heartbreakers on my list. Oh. I just think they're just amazing.
And here's
bands.
Here's the thing about Tom Petty.
Have to mention him.
He was never the most popular, right? He was never the most popular singer in the world. You know, he was never Van Halen, but for a 30-year run, he was always relevant. He was always putting out good music. He was always, from the mid 70s through the 90s, he was consistently putting out good music. Yeah.
I mean, the soundtrack of one of the soundtracks of our time.
Totally.
When you hear those songs, you just instantly.
I mean, the Hard Promises. Okay, that instantly takes me back to 8th and 9th grade. You know, that album, that playing the whole. I mean, I love it. I love Tom Petty.
Yeah,
love Tom Petty.
So sad.
Yeah, and to your point, we're gonna only see more of this, which is sad. You know, because Father Time, right? You can't beat Father Time. So yeah, we'll only see more of these guys leaving us over the next few years. So you got to enjoy it while it's here, right? And to the original point, right? These old bands that are out touring, yeah, maybe they don't sound so great, but if you thought it was going to be your last time to ever see them, maybe you'd want to go see them. I don't know.
Yes.
Well, hey,
that was fun.
It was a lot of fun, and again, we kind of meandered all around, which seems to be our style. We're like our own jam band, Jeff. That's what we are. We're like a jam band podcast. So
Jamcast.
A Jamcast. It's a Jamcast. That's probably taken somewhere. Jamcast probably taken somewhere. But hey, I forgot to mention we are on Patreon, and remember, our goal is to make $9 a month on Patreon. Okay, that's our goal. $9 a month. All we need is three patrons, and then we make $9 a month. So, but seriously, you can support the podcast on Patreon. You can email us, classicguitarrock@mail.com. And of course, check it out we have got the YouTube channel, and we're slowly but surely dominating the world. That's right. Anyways, Jeff, it was great. Thanks for another great episode, and we'll see you again next week.
Yes. Adios.
Thanks for listening to the Classic Guitar Rock Podcast. Please like, subscribe, and share. You can email us at classicguitarrock@mail.com. We'll see you for the next episode of the Classic Guitar Rock Podcast.